Hero. Any person admired for courage, nobility, or exploits, especially in war. Any person admired for qualities or achievements and regarded as an ideal or model. They rise to the occasion. They meet the challenge. They inspire us. They are heroes. Geneviève de Galard, known as the Angel of Dien Bien Phu, she volunteered as a flight nurse during the French Indochinese War. A native of France, de Galard now lives in Paris. Geneviève de Galard received the French Legion of Honor at Dien Bien Phu, and she later received the Medal of Freedom from President Eisenhower. Dien Bien Phu. The strategic garrison was France's last stand in Vietnam. By May of 1954, Dien Bien Phu had been under siege by the Vietnamese communists for more than 2 months. The fall of Dien Bien Phu would mark the end of France's involvement in Indochina.
The climactic struggle for Dien Bien Phu enters its second month with airborne reinforcements shuttled to the beleaguered garrison, where paratroopers drop to a fate that remains in the balance. The picked contingent hits the ground and goes into action immediately with machine gun and mortar fire.
One night, the night was clear and quiet, and we were out of the shelters to see the parachutes falling down in the sky like flowers. It was very poetic and beautiful. And a young boy fall just by me, and when he got up on his legs, he saw me and he said, "Oh, a girl here." And I felt something optimistic in his voice, as if he thought, if there is a woman here, it's less hellish as we thought.
Geneviève de Galard was part of a proud tradition of women in war. The flight nurse was one of the first people a wounded soldier would see after being evacuated from battle. From the late 1940s to the mid-1970s, nurses, first from France, then from the United States, would care for the wounded in conflict against the Vietnamese. These women were witnesses of what seemed to be a never-ending war.
An air escort, and the only woman present at Dien Bien Phu during the battle, Geneviève de Galard gained the admiration of all through her quiet courage and smiling devotion.
The Général de Cast told me, "Geneviève, I've got something for you." And he gave me an envelope. And I wondered what it could be. I opened the envelope and I saw 2 decorations. That was a great surprise. And Colonel Langley gave me the text of the citation he had prepared for me. I was really moved. And I told them I don't think I deserve them. And he told me, "Yes, you deserve it. What you did, many men would have been unable to do it."
But this recognition of her gallantry was just the first. Geneviève de Galard would emerge from Dien Bien Phu an international hero. In August of 1954, she was greeted in New York with a ticker tape parade down Broadway, and she was the first foreign woman ever invited to the United States by Congress.
I couldn't understand why they asked me to come, because I didn't feel I've done something so extraordinary. And I was welcomed by President Eisenhower, and when he gave me the Medal of Freedom. This honor, which was done to me, was also an honor for all the French combatants of Dien Bien Phu.
Heroes will be back in a moment. Our return to heroes. This is Vietnam today, below Dien Bien Phu. Through the mists of time are recalled the bitter struggles to control the bowl-shaped basin. The French chose Dien Bien Phu as the site for their last stand because of its strategic location. From here, they might block the Vietnamese communists, or Vietminh, from crossing into neighboring Laos, trying to halt their growing influence.
A battle to the death is joined at Dien Bien Phu, an isolated French Union stronghold deep in communist-held territory of Indochina. The battle is at its height as French forces repulse repeated fanatical charges by 40,000 Reds.
For the first 3 months of 1954, Dien Bien Phu was just an airstrip to flight nurse Geneviève de Galard, a place where she would land, briefly glimpse at the devastation of war, evacuate the wounded, and leave.
When the door of the plane opened, there were the male nurses. They were there with the stretchers, with the wounded, and they were badly shaved, with sunken eyes, and I got the impression we were landing in hell.
The brave stand at Dien Bien Phu was the end of the road for the French in Vietnam. But it was the time during which the United States' interest in Southeast Asia would grow, as she was slowly drawn into the Vietnamese conflict. France's road to defeat was colorfully chronicled in the newsreels of the day, eerily foreshadowing what was ahead for the United States.
Along the Dai River to throw back an attack of 40,000 Reds on a desperate foray for food. They are blasted out of a mountain stronghold. After fording the river, the slow advance continues against Reds who resist to the bitter end. It was here that the son of French Commander-in-Chief de Tassigny lost his life. Steady pressure flushes scores of prisoners from the jungle. Raising of the tricolor marks another step in the never-ending struggle of the Vietnamese to drive the Reds from the hottest corner in Southeast Asia. The fight for Indochina goes on. French pilots flying American planes take up with the big guns left off, blasting communist divisions which had infiltrated French positions in the Hanoi Delta. But from the backwaters of war come the helpless victims of aggression, the women, the children, the old and infirm. Communism passed their way. They have little left now but a spark of life that drives them on toward escape and sanctuary behind the French lines. Some of them are childishly grateful in their thanks at being alive. War is not all guns and glory.
War is awful. My job was to be there because it was there. They were combating, and for me, this combat was really a combat for freedom.
Week by week, the struggle in Indochina increases in intensity, and beleaguered French garrisons, heavily outnumbered, are supplied by air as they confront 20,000 Red Chinese and Vietminh. The hot spot on the front is Na San, south of the Black River. Here, freshly supplied, the defenders dig in for the expected onslaught. Heavily fortified and armed bunkers are erected at key points, and for 48 hectic hours, the defenders brace themselves as the airlift continues its shuttle service. Light bombers and fighters are massed for support, and they swing into action with napalm bombs. Hundreds of Reds die under the barrage, but still they come, finally overrunning the prepared positions by sheer weight of numbers. French and Vietnam forces advance under cover of a heavy barrage in the Delta region of northern Indochina as they open the heaviest attack of the 8-year-old war against Vietminh Red troops. In a massive three-pronged drive, they attempt to cut off the main body of Reds, but spiked traps capable of piercing a shoe, making the going rugged in the marsh grass, where the cruel weapons are all but invisible. Reinforced by 8 new French battalions and equipped with fresh armament, General Navarre, now commanding the operations, carries the war to the enemy in a strategy which it is hoped will bring an end to the bloody struggle within a year and end a sterile stalemate. In the war of attrition, the problem of transport and supply has been a major one. Here, U.S. LSTs often were a decisive factor as they land troops and supplies on otherwise inaccessible beachheads. As the do-or-die phase of the struggle approaches, the French ask for more U.S. help, and new U.S. transport planes are sent, together with 200 technicians, strictly on a non-combatant basis.
The equipment which we have sent to Indochina is highly technical, so we are sending technicians as a temporary training force. We are sending planes, but no pilots. We are not sending combat troops. The outcome of the war in Indochina is highly important to the free world.
The stage was set for the siege at Dien Bien Phu, where the French would make their final stand. The Communists would prove overpowering adversaries, and the French would leave their former colony in defeat.
Supplied by airlift reinforcements, the garrison, outnumbered 4 to 1, kills or wounds 10,000 of the attackers, but sustains severe losses of its own in the fiercest single battle of the 8-year war. With no let-up in sight, the wounded are tended but must remain, since the evacuating airstrip is knocked out.
Arriving March 28, 1954, with the last hospital plane that could land, Geneviève de Galard immediately went to work for the commanding doctor of the advanced surgery unit.
I did all the post-operation cares, and I took care of the most wounded people. I was, at that time, I was no more a flight nurse, but I was a nurse taking care of an underground hospital.
As a symbol of the desperate plight of Dien Bien Phu, flying boxcars and B-26 bombers take off from Hanoi for strafing and attack missions around the garrison, which is making military history in its stand against attacking Reds who outnumber them 4 to 1. The planes must go in under murderous anti-aircraft fire from Red batteries to drop their paratroop reinforcements, who themselves risk death as they float down to their missions. They are followed from the boxcars by badly needed supplies cut off when landing strips were knocked out.
By her own initiative, and despite violent concentrations of enemy fire and artillery, she tended to all of the wounded at the center of the resistance during furious assaults from March 30th to April 2nd.
There were wounded everywhere. Some of them were still outside the shelters, outside the underground hospital, because no room for them. And we had been working during 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. There were stretchers everywhere in the underground passage leading to the operation room. In the room, there were stretchers between the bed. It was metallic bed on 3 levels.
Living among the wounded, sleeping on a stretcher in the stifling air of the advanced hospital unit, she provided care with an untiring activity at all hours of the day and night.
I was exhausted after those 3 days and 3 nights, and it was morally awful, and sometimes I felt as if I would like to sleep, not to be able to think and to see all this horror. And that was really, that was the most terrible time for me, because we couldn't face all this horror, all this wounded. That was morally terrible. I think my sufferings were more moral than physical.
With an incomparable professional competence and a steel-like spirit, Geneviève de Galard was a precious auxiliary to the doctors and contributed to the saving of numerous lives.
I saw the courage of the wounded. One of them, he was about 20, he lost 2 arms and 1 leg, and he put his half arm on my shoulder, and he was jumping on his only leg. And he told me, when we met again in Paris, we go dancing.
Operation Castor takes the pressure off the original defenders of the garrison, whose name has become military legend. Throwing air superiority into the struggle, all possible cover is provided before monsoons ground planes. Outnumbered 4 to 1, they repulse attacks. Both sides fight to the last ditch for Dien Bien Phu.
I didn't have time to be frightened because I was so busy, and they needed me so more for the wounded. A feminine presence is something very important. A woman in this situation made the situation less terrible.
The hopes and fears of the world center on Geneva as the first sessions dealing with Korean and Indo-Chinese problems get underway. Spearheading the Reds are Foreign Minister Molotov and his deputy Andrei Gromyko, from whom Francis Georges Bidault seeks a ceasefire in Indochina for the evacuation of wounded in the embattled garrison of Dien Bien Phu. Until the last gun in the besieged garrison of Dien Bien Phu was silenced, American privateers manned by French crews leave Hanoi in round-the-clock sorties to hammer at the Vietminh Reds. The bombers are immediately followed by clearly marked mercy planes with food and medical supplies for the 1,000 wounded in the underground hospital. The wounded who, after the fall of the fortress, became the pawns in ceasefire disputes at Geneva and the opposing commands in Indochina. These supplies are a matter of life or death for the men who lie helpless in the hands of their communist captors.
Those first 3 days were terrible because we had no more medicine, no more bandages, no more water.
The chutes, as they land, join the shell pockmarks where gallant men fought to the death.
The first night, 2 Vietminh asked me to come with them and to speak in a small shelter, and they kept me about 2 hours there, and I was rather frightened that they will oblige me to sign something, so I was very cold, and at each question, and they told me, we ask you to come because we know that you have been taking good care of the wounded, and we want to see with you what we can do. And I was answering, you have only one thing to do, to allow the evacuation of the wounded.
After truce conferences, helicopters bring in a trickle of the most severely wounded to Luang Prabang for transfer to Hanoi. Many of these men had lain for weeks under constant bombardment during the days which preceded the fall of Dien Bien Phu.
We were prisoners. The fight had been terrible, but we were all together.
Evacuation of Dien Bien Phu wounded is stepped up as hospital planes roll in almost hourly at Hanoi, bearing men who have lain for weeks in underground wards during the hopeless defense of the fort. Approximately 400 have been released of the 750 promised by the Reds. Their gaunt bodies bear the marks of the tortures they have endured. That they survived at all is due in large measure to the angel of Dien Bien Phu, Nurse Geneviève de Galard, who stuck with her wounded, refusing freedom after the fall of the garrison.
I asked the Vietminh if I could stay until the end of the evacuation, and they agreed. But 2 days or 3 days later, they come and tell me the international press is telling that we keep you by force. So we are going to leave today. And I left on the 24th of May, and the last day of the evacuation of the wounded was on the 25th.
After her evacuation, de Galard toured the hospitals of Hanoi, visiting the wounded she cared for at Dien Bien Phu. It was then that she got her first taste of the notoriety that would become a regular part of her life.
In Paris, she receives a heroine's welcome and the embrace of her mother, the Comtesse de Galard. I did only my duty, says the woman whose heroism was written large at Dien Bien Phu.
I can't forget. I think it marked me until my death, you see. I think I won't never be after like I was before.
Heroes will return in a moment. We now return to Heroes. 2 years after her heroic actions at Dien Bien Phu, Geneviève de Galard married Jean de Ulm, another veteran of Indochina. For many years, Mrs. de Ulm continued to work with disabled veterans, both in France and abroad. She is now an elected member of the Paris Municipal Council, and she spends much of her time working with handicapped children.
I've been able to do more things because I think people have confidence in me, you see. And but now my position is rather different. They had confidence in me because I was Geneviève de Galard, but now I am a councillor in the 17th district of Paris, and I realize that now, even if they don't know about my past, they have confidence on me, and sometimes I'm glad to be Geneviève de Hall without always being Geneviève de Galard. I'm still working for handicapped. It's no more veterans handicaps who handicapped veterans, but it's handicapped children. And I feel the circle is over. I came back to my first love.
Hero. A person admired for courage, nobility, or exploits, especially in war. A person admired for qualities or achievements and regarded as an ideal or model. She rose to the occasion. She met the challenge. She inspired us. She is a hero.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.